Marcus Johnson stared at the concrete wall of his cell. 8 years down. 12 more to go. The numbers haunted him every single day. He was 26 years old when the judge sentenced him to 20 years for armed robbery. Now he was 34. By the time he got out, he'd be 46. Middle-aged. His youth stolen by one terrible decision made when he was desperate and stupid. His cellmate, an older man named Thomas, was reading a book. Thomas always had a book. History, philosophy, poetry, science. It didn't matter. He read everything the prison library had to offer. "You ever think about doing something different?" Thomas asked without looking up from his page. "Different how?" "I'm locked in a cell. Not a lot of options. I mean with your mind, with your time. You can sit here for 12 more years feeling sorry for yourself, or you can use this time to become someone different, someone better." Marcus had heard this kind of talk before. Self-help nonsense, motivational garbage that didn't change anything. But something in Thomas's voice was different, genuine, like he actually believed it. "What do you suggest? Meditation? Positive thinking? Prayer?" Thomas finally looked up. Education. Real education. Not just getting a GED, I mean actually learning. History, literature, mathematics, philosophy, skills. Becoming the kind of person who doesn't end up back here. Marcus laughed bitterly. "I barely graduated high school. I'm not smart enough for that. Intelligence isn't fixed. You can develop it. I've seen men in here transform themselves completely through learning. I've seen violent criminals become teachers, drug dealers become counselors. You just have to want it bad enough." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Thomas's words kept echoing in his mind. 12 more years. He could waste them or use them. The choice was his. Before we go further, I need you to understand something. This isn't just Marcus's story. It's the story of how one man's transformation became a movement, how a forgotten prisoner became a beacon of hope, how rock bottom became a foundation. Marcus grew up in the south side of Chicago. His mother worked 2 jobs trying to keep them afloat. His father left when Marcus was 6. He barely remembered him. The neighborhood was rough. Gangs controlled the streets. Violence was normal. Survival meant joining up or staying invisible. Marcus tried to stay invisible. He was smart as a kid, did well in school until middle school when everything fell apart. His mother lost one of her jobs. They lost their apartment, ended up in a shelter, then bouncing between relatives' couches. School became impossible. How do you focus on homework when you don't know where you're sleeping that night? Marcus's grades dropped. Teachers gave up on him. He gave up on himself. By 16, he dropped out. Started running with a crew that sold drugs. It wasn't about getting rich, it was about eating, about having a place to sleep, about survival. He told himself he'd only do it temporarily. Just until he got on his feet, just until he saved some money, just until things got better. But things never got better. They got worse. At 26, Marcus was desperate. His mother was sick. Medical bills were piling up. His girlfriend was pregnant. He needed money fast. The robbery wasn't planned. Not really. His friend Carlos mentioned a corner store that kept a lot of cash. Owned by an old man who didn't have cameras. Easy target. Marcus knew it was wrong, knew it was dangerous. But he was desperate. His mother needed medication they couldn't afford. His girlfriend needed prenatal care. He felt trapped. The robbery went wrong from the start. The owner had a gun. Shots were fired. No one died, thank God, but the owner was wounded. Marcus and Carlos were arrested 2 blocks away. The trial was quick. Marcus had a public defender who barely knew his case. The prosecutor painted him as a violent criminal, a danger to society. The judge showed no mercy. 20 years. Marcus was 26 years old. He'd be 46 when he got out, if he lived that long. Prison was dangerous. Many men didn't make it. His mother died 2 years into his sentence. Cancer. She'd visited him once, could barely look at him. The disappointment in her eyes haunted him more than anything. His girlfriend left. Took their son, a boy Marcus had never met, born while he was awaiting trial. She said she couldn't raise a child alone while waiting for a convict. He understood. It still destroyed him. Marcus was alone. Forgotten. Just another young black man locked away. Just another statistic. For the first 6 years, he was numb, going through the motions, surviving day by day, getting into fights, spending time in solitary, becoming harder, colder, more like the criminal they said he was. Then he met Thomas. Thomas was serving a life sentence. He'd been inside for 23 years, convicted of second-degree murder when he was 28. He was 51 now, would die in prison. But Thomas was different from other lifers. He wasn't bitter or violent or defeated. He was peaceful, thoughtful, always reading, always learning, always trying to help younger inmates avoid his mistakes. I wasted the first 10 years feeling sorry for myself, Thomas told Marcus one night. Angry at the world, angry at the judge, angry at my lawyer, angry at everyone but myself. Then I realized something. I can't change my sentence. But I can change who I am. I can't get out of prison. But I can free my mind. Thomas had earned a bachelor's degree through correspondence courses, then a master's in psychology. He taught GED classes to other inmates, ran a book club, facilitated conflict resolution sessions. Education saved me, Thomas said, not just from being ignorant, from being who I was. The person who committed murder wasn't educated, wasn't thoughtful, didn't understand consequences or alternatives. Education made me a different person, a better person. Marcus was skeptical at first. What did education matter in prison? What good was a degree when you had a criminal record? Who would hire an ex-con? But he had nothing but time. And Thomas was persistent. Start with your GED, Thomas urged. Just start. See how it feels. Marcus enrolled in the prison's education program. The first day of class, he felt ridiculous. A grown man sitting in a classroom learning basic math and grammar. Some of his fellow inmates mocked him, said he was wasting his time, said education wouldn't change anything for someone like them. But Marcus kept going. And something strange happened. He started remembering why he'd liked school as a kid, the satisfaction of solving a problem, the pleasure of understanding something new, the sense of accomplishment. He passed his GED in 6 months. Thomas encouraged him to keep going. Take college courses, get a degree. I can't afford college, Marcus protested. There are programs, grants, scholarships for inmates. I'll help you apply. They spent months researching options. Most universities didn't serve incarcerated students, but some did. A small liberal arts college 2 states away offered correspondence courses for prisoners. Marcus applied, was accepted, received a scholarship that covered most of his tuition. At 35 years old, 8 years into his sentence, he became a college student. The first semester was brutal. Marcus hadn't written an essay since high school, hadn't done serious reading, hadn't thought critically about complex ideas. He was overwhelmed. He almost quit after the first month. His English professor gave him a D on his first paper. 20 pages of corrections in red ink. It felt like failure. Like proof he wasn't smart enough for this. Thomas found him tearing up the paper in frustration. Don't quit, Thomas said simply. Learn. Those corrections are lessons. Study them. Ask questions. Try again. Marcus rewrote the paper. Got a C. Rewrote it again. Got a B-. By the end of the semester, he was getting A's. He majored in sociology, wanted to understand the social forces that had shaped his life. Poverty, inequality, the school-to-prison pipeline, systemic racism. All the things that had made someone like him almost inevitable. The more he learned, the more he understood. His choices had been his own, yes, he owned that. But those choices had been made in a context of limited opportunities, failing institutions, and structural disadvantages that made crime feel like the only option. Understanding didn't excuse his crime, but it helped him understand how to prevent others from making the same mistakes. By his 11th year inside, Marcus had earned his bachelor's degree, graduated with honors. His professors praised his work, said he had a gift for analysis and writing. Thomas cried when Marcus got his diploma. "I knew you could do it. I knew you were capable of more." "I want to keep going," Marcus said. "I want to get a master's degree. I want to teach when I get out. Help people like me. Show them education can change everything." Thomas smiled. "Then do it. You have time. Use it." Marcus enrolled in a graduate program in criminal justice, focused on rehabilitation and re-entry programs, studied what worked and what didn't, read hundreds of studies, wrote papers analyzing the failures of the American prison system. His professors were astonished by his insights. Here was a man living the reality they only studied. His perspective was invaluable. One professor, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, took a special interest in Marcus. She specialized in prisoner re-entry and rehabilitation. She visited him quarterly to discuss his research. "Your work is remarkable," she told him during one visit. "You understand these issues in ways academics never can. Your lived experience combined with rigorous education is powerful." "Thank you. But what good does it do me in here?" "You're preparing. For when you get out, the work you're doing now will open doors. I'll make sure of it." Marcus completed his master's degree in his 14th year of incarceration. 6 years to go. He was 40, educated, transformed, but still locked away. He started teaching in the prison, GED classes like Thomas had, college prep courses, life skills workshops, conflict resolution seminars. He helped dozens of inmates earn their diplomas, encouraged others to pursue higher education. He was becoming the man Thomas had been for him, a mentor, a guide, someone who showed others that transformation was possible. But Marcus wanted more. He wanted to reach people outside the prison, people at risk of making his mistakes, young men growing up in circumstances like his, kids who felt trapped and desperate and saw crime as their only option. He started writing essays about his journey, about the failures of the prison system, about the power of education, about redemption and second chances. Dr. Warren helped him publish his work. Academic journals, opinion pieces in newspapers, a blog that gained thousands of followers. People were astonished that this sophisticated, thoughtful writing came from a prisoner, from a man convicted of armed robbery. They couldn't reconcile the crime with the person. But that was exactly Marcus's point. People weren't their worst moments. They were capable of change, capable of growth, deserving of opportunity. Letters started coming. From students studying criminal justice, from other inmates inspired by his story, from at-risk youth who saw themselves in his journey, from mothers whose sons were incarcerated, desperate for hope. Marcus answered every single letter, shared his story, offered encouragement, provided resources for education programs, connected people with mentors. A movement was forming, not a large one, not yet, but real. People who believed rehabilitation was possible, who believed education could transform lives, who believed forgotten prisoners deserved second chances. The media noticed. A local newspaper did a profile, then a national magazine. Then a documentary crew wanted to film his story. Marcus was uncomfortable with attention. This wasn't about him, it was about the principle, about proving that people could change, about creating pathways for others. But he agreed to the interviews. If his story could inspire one person to pursue education, to choose a different path, to give someone a second chance, it was worth it. Marcus was released after serving 18 years. He'd earned good behavior credits that reduced his sentence. He was 44 years old. The day he walked out of prison, Dr. Warren was waiting for him. She'd arranged everything. A job, an apartment, enrollment in a doctoral program, re-entry support. "You're not doing this alone," she said. "I've assembled a team. We're going to help you transition. Make sure you succeed." Marcus stood on the street, breathing free air for the first time in 18 years. The world had changed. Everything was digital now. Smartphones, social media, streaming services. He felt like he'd time-traveled. "I'm terrified," he admitted to Dr. Warren. "That's normal. But you're prepared. More prepared than almost any released prisoner I've ever worked with. You have education, skills, support, purpose. You're going to make it." The first month was overwhelming. Everything was expensive. Everything required technology he didn't understand. Basic tasks felt impossible. Getting a phone, opening a bank account, buying groceries, using public transportation. Things people took for granted were foreign to him after 18 years inside. He had nightmares every night, woke up confused about where he was, reached for routines that didn't exist anymore, felt anxious in crowds, felt isolated alone. Dr. Warren had warned him about this. Re-entry was traumatic. Most released prisoners struggled with PTSD, depression, anxiety. The transition from total institutional control to complete autonomy was jarring. But Marcus had advantages most released prisoners didn't. Education, a job waiting, a support network, resources. He started working at a non-profit that provided re-entry services. Used his education and experience to help newly released prisoners navigate the transition. Found apartments. Connected people with jobs. Taught life skills classes. His colleagues were amazed by his dedication. He worked long hours. Answered calls at midnight from panicking clients. Used his own money to help people when funding ran short. "You're going to burn out," one colleague warned. "Maybe. But I remember what it was like, walking out with nothing. No one who cared if I made it or not. If I can prevent that for even one person, it's worth it." Marcus enrolled in a doctoral program part-time. Continued his research on rehabilitation and re-entry. Published articles. Presented at conferences. Became a sought-after speaker on criminal justice reform. But his real passion was direct service. Working with the newly released. Mentoring at-risk youth. Visiting prisons to teach and encourage current inmates. He reconnected with his son. The boy was 16 now. Barely remembered his father. Angry about growing up without him. Resentful of the abandonment. "I know I can't make up for being gone," Marcus told him. "I made a terrible mistake that hurt you. I owned it. I paid for it. And I've spent every day since trying to become someone better, someone worthy of being your father." His son was skeptical. But Marcus was persistent. He showed up. Week after week. Patient with the anger. Honest about his failures. Transparent about his journey. Slowly, painfully, they built a relationship. His son started asking questions. About prison. About education. About change. They went to basketball games together. Worked on homework. Talked about life and choices and consequences. "I don't want to end up like you did," his son said one night. "Good. That's smart. Learn from my mistakes. Make better choices. But know that if you do mess up, if you do make mistakes, you're not defined by them forever. You can change. You can rebuild. I'm proof." 3 years after his release, Marcus completed his doctorate. His dissertation examined the long-term outcomes of education programs for incarcerated individuals. The data was compelling. Prisoners who earned degrees had dramatically lower recidivism rates. Family relationships. Improved mental health. Education wasn't just academic achievement. It was transformation. It was rehabilitation. It was hope. Dr. Warren helped Marcus launch his own nonprofit, the Second Chance Education Fund, providing scholarships for incarcerated students, mentorship programs, re-entry support, advocacy for expanding prison education programs. The need was overwhelming. Thousands of prisoners wanted to pursue education but couldn't afford it, didn't have access to programs, didn't know where to start. Marcus built a team of formerly incarcerated educators, people who'd transformed their own lives through learning. They understood the challenges, the stigma, the barriers. Together, they created comprehensive support, not just tuition assistance, but mentorship, study skills. study skills, training, technology access, book stipends, academic counseling, everything a successful student needed. The first year, they served 32 incarcerated students. By year 3, over 200. By year 5, nearly 1,000 across 12 states. The outcomes were remarkable. An 87% graduation rate. Only 8% recidivism among their participants, compared to 68% nationally. Graduates found meaningful employment, rebuilt family relationships, became mentors themselves. Marcus's work gained national recognition. He testified before Congress about prison education, consulted with state departments of correction, spoke at universities about rehabilitation and redemption. But he never forgot where he'd started. Every month, he returned to the prison where he'd served his sentence, taught classes, encouraged inmates, shared his story. "If I can do it, you can do it," he told them. "I was a high school dropout, barely literate, spent 18 years in here thinking my life was over. But education saved me, changed me, gave me purpose. It can do the same for you." He visited the grave of his former cellmate, Thomas. Thomas had died 5 years into Marcus's sentence. Heart attack. Never saw Marcus's transformation, never knew how profoundly he'd impacted Marcus's life. "Thank you," Marcus said at the grave. "You saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. You believed I could change when I didn't believe it. This is all because of you." 7 years after his release, Marcus had built something significant. The Second Chance Education Fund served over 2,000 incarcerated students annually. They'd expanded beyond individual scholarships to creating entire education programs inside prisons. They partnered with universities to offer on-site courses, brought professors into correctional facilities, established libraries, created peer tutoring programs, facilitated study groups. But Marcus kept noticing a gap. Education was transforming lives inside prison. But the moment people were released, support evaporated. The transition destroyed them. Within months, many ended up back inside. "We need to extend our support through re-entry," Marcus told his board. "Education isn't enough. People need housing assistance, job placement, mental health support, community. We need to follow them from cell to stability." They launched the Re-Entry Fellows Program, comprehensive support for the first 2 years after release. Housing stipends, job coaching, therapy, mentorship, educational support for those continuing their degrees. Community building activities. The first cohort was 12 people. All had earned degrees while incarcerated. All were committed to transformation. All were terrified of failing. Marcus knew that terror. He'd lived it. He designed the program around everything he'd wished he'd had. Not just services, but genuine community. People who understood, who'd been there, who wouldn't judge. The fellows met weekly, shared struggles and victories, supported each other through crises, celebrated milestones, became family. Marcus watched them navigate the challenges he'd faced. The technology barriers, the social stigma, the discrimination from employers, the family complications, the trauma symptoms. But unlike him, they weren't alone. They had resources. They had each other. They had hope. By the end of the first year, all 12 fellows were employed, 10 in their field of study. All were stably housed. None had reoffended. 8 were continuing their education. All were mentoring other people re-entering society. The program expanded. 20 fellows. 50. Eventually, over 100 annually across 5 cities. Local media covered their work. Then national media. Marcus appeared on news programs, podcasts, documentary series, always telling the same story. Education transforms. Rehabilitation works. People deserve second chances. Corporations started noticing. Several major companies committed to hiring program graduates. Provided not just jobs, but career pathways. Training. Advancement opportunities. recognition that these employees brought valuable perspectives. One tech company CEO, herself a child of an incarcerated parent, was particularly moved by Marcus's work. "My father spent 12 years in prison," she shared at a fundraising gala. "He came out with nothing. No skills, no support. He tried so hard but couldn't find his footing. He died 2 years after release, alone and forgotten. Marcus's program gives people what my father never had, a real chance. I'm committing $5 million to expand this work." The donation transformed their capacity. They opened centers in 10 additional cities, served 3,000 students annually, hired 50 staff members, most formerly incarcerated themselves. Marcus built an ecosystem, not just his organization, but a network of partners: universities, employers, housing providers, mental health clinics, legal aid services, all coordinated to support people from incarceration through successful reintegration. They collected rigorous data, tracked outcomes, published research. The results were undeniable. Participants in their comprehensive program had a 5% recidivism rate, 92% employment within 1 year, 78% pursuing additional education, measurable improvements in mental health, family relationships, civic engagement. This wasn't just rehabilitation, it was transformation. It was proof that with the right support, people could completely rebuild their lives. State legislators took notice. Several states passed laws expanding prison education programs, providing funding for re-entry services, reducing barriers to employment for people with records. The White House invited Marcus to a summit on criminal justice reform. He sat at a table with policymakers, advocates, formerly incarcerated people, and families impacted by incarceration. "The system is broken," Marcus told them. "We incarcerate more people than any nation on earth. We warehouse them in brutal conditions, provide minimal rehabilitation, then release them with nothing and act surprised when they fail. We can do better. We must do better. My life is proof that people can change. But they need opportunity. They need education. They need support. They need society to believe they're worth saving." Federal grants followed, multi-year funding to expand the model nationally. Other organizations replicated their approach. A movement was building. But Marcus stayed focused on individual people. The young man released after 12 years who earned a bachelor's degree and became a social worker. The woman who survived 20 years inside and is now a college professor. The father who reunited with his children and rebuilt his family. Every story was a victory. Every transformation was proof. Every life rebuilt was a revolution. 10 years after his release, Marcus was invited back to the prison where he'd served 18 years. They were opening a new education center, a comprehensive facility with classrooms, a library, computer labs, study spaces. Named after Thomas, Marcus's former cellmate and mentor. Marcus stood in the center, overwhelmed with emotion. This place had been his hell, the site of his greatest suffering, his lowest point. But it had also been the site of his transformation, where he'd discovered education, where he'd found purpose, where he'd become someone new. The warden approached him. A different warden from Marcus's time, younger, progressive, genuinely committed to rehabilitation. "I've followed your work," the warden said. "You're changing how we think about incarceration. Proving rehabilitation isn't naive idealism, but practical policy. This center exists because of you, because you showed what's possible." Marcus looked at the inmates gathered for the dedication. Young men and women, many the age he'd been when he entered. He saw himself in their faces. The fear, the anger, the resignation. But he also saw possibility, potential, hope. The warden invited him to speak. Marcus approached the podium, looked out at the sea of faces in prison uniforms. 17 years ago, I sat where you're sitting," he began. "I was 34 years old, 8 years into a 20-year sentence. angry, hopeless, convinced my life was over, that I'd made mistakes too big to recover from, that I'd always be just another forgotten prisoner. Then I met a man named Thomas, my cellmate. He saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. He challenged me to use my time differently, to educate myself, to become someone new. I thought he was crazy. What good was education in prison? Who cared about a convict's degree? What employer would hire someone like me? But I had nothing but time, so I started. GED, then college, then graduate school, then a doctorate. I read hundreds of books, wrote thousands of pages, learned to think critically, to analyze, to understand the world and my place in it. Education didn't just give me skills, it transformed who I was. The person who committed armed robbery was ignorant, desperate, short-sighted, couldn't imagine alternatives. Education made me see differently, think differently, become different. I'm not going to stand here and promise education will get you out early. It didn't for me. I served 18 years. Education is not a shortcut. But it's a transformation. It's a way to ensure that when you do get out, you're prepared. You're someone different, someone better. I'm not going to promise it's easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. There were times I wanted to quit, times I felt stupid, times the work seemed pointless. But I kept going, and it saved my life. I'm not going to promise society will welcome you with open arms when you get out. There's stigma, discrimination, barriers. It's not fair, but it's real. But education gives you tools to overcome those barriers, to prove yourself, to create opportunities. You're not defined by your worst moment, by your crime, by your sentence. You're capable of change, of growth, of becoming someone you can't currently imagine. Thomas died before he saw what I became, but his investment in me has multiplied. I've helped thousands of people access education in prison. Hundreds have successfully re-entered society. Many are now helping others. The ripple effect is endless. You can be part of that ripple. You can take this opportunity. Use this center. Educate yourself. Transform. Then, when you get out, help someone else do the same. That's how we change the system. Not through policy alone, but through individual transformation that multiplies. One person helping another. Paying forward what was given to us. This center is named after Thomas. It represents his legacy. But it can represent yours too. Use it. Make the most of your time here. Become someone different. Then go out and prove that redemption is possible. Thank you for letting me come back. Thank you for listening. And thank you to Thomas, wherever he is. This is all because you believed in one forgotten prisoner. Look what that belief became. The room was silent. Then one inmate started clapping. Then another. Then the whole room erupted in applause. After the ceremony, inmates lined up to talk with Marcus. Some wanted advice. Some wanted resources. Some just wanted to shake his hand. To touch someone who'd made it out and built something meaningful. A young man, maybe 23, approached nervously. Mr. Johnson, I'm serving 15 years for drug trafficking. I dropped out of high school. Never thought I was smart enough for college. But hearing your story, maybe I could try. Marcus took his hands. What's your name? Daniel. Daniel, I barely graduated high school. I thought I was stupid. But intelligence isn't fixed. You can develop it. You just have to want it. If you're willing to work hard, I'll personally make sure you have the resources you need. Give me your information. Let's get you started. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that? For me? You don't even know me. Someone did it for me. Thomas didn't know me either. He just saw potential. I see the same in you. Don't waste it. Marcus spent 3 hours that day connecting with inmates, taking names, making promises, committing to follow up. This was the work that mattered, not the speaking engagements or the media interviews or the awards. This one person at a time, paying forward what was given to him. Driving away from the prison that night, Marcus thought about his journey. From desperate criminal to forgotten prisoner to educated advocate to national leader, it seemed impossible, like it had happened to someone else. But it was real. Every step had been hard. Every victory had been earned. Every transformation had been fought for. And it wasn't just his story. It was Thomas's, Dr. Warren's, his son's, the thousands of people he'd helped. All their stories woven together into something larger than any individual. A movement. A revolution. Proof that people aren't disposable. That mistakes aren't permanent. That transformation is possible. That education saves lives. That second chances work. That forgotten prisoners can become powerful advocates for change. 15 years after his release, Marcus had built something extraordinary. The Second Chance Education Fund operated in 30 states, served over 5,000 incarcerated students annually, had helped over 2,000 people successfully re-enter society. The outcomes were remarkable. A 4% recidivism rate among program participants, compared to 68% nationally. 94% employment within 18 months of release. 82% pursuing additional education. Measurable improvements across every indicator of successful reintegration. But beyond the numbers were the stories. The young woman who earned her PhD while incarcerated and now runs a victim advocacy organization. The man who became a lawyer and represents indigent clients. The father who rebuilt relationships with his children and breaks generational cycles of incarceration. Each person was a victory. Each transformation was a revolution. Each life rebuilt was proof that the system could be different. Marcus's work influenced national policy. Several states passed laws making college programs available in all correctional facilities. Federal funding for prison education increased dramatically. The Second Chance Pell Grant was reinstated, allowing incarcerated people to access financial aid. But Marcus knew the work was far from done. 2 million people were still incarcerated in America. Most had minimal access to quality education. Most would be released with little support. Most would fail, not because they couldn't change, but because the system was designed for their failure. "We've proven the model works," Marcus told his staff at their 15th anniversary celebration. "Now we need to scale it. Make comprehensive rehabilitation the standard, not the exception. Transform the entire system." They announced an ambitious expansion plan. Partner with every state department of correction. Establish education centers in 500 facilities. Create re-entry support programs in every major city. Train 10,000 formerly incarcerated people as peer mentors and educators. "It sounds impossible," one board member cautioned. "The scope is enormous. The cost is staggering." "So was my transformation," Marcus replied. 18 years ago, I was a forgotten prisoner who barely had a GED. Now I'm running a national organization changing criminal justice policy. If that's possible, anything is possible. We just have to believe it and work for it. The campaign launched. They raised $100 million, secured partnerships with 30 states, enrolled thousands of new students, hired hundreds of staff, built infrastructure, created systems. And Marcus kept doing what he'd always done, working directly with people, teaching classes in prisons, mentoring released individuals, answering desperate phone calls at midnight, showing up when others gave up. His son graduated from college, decided to become a social worker, focused on juvenile justice, working to prevent kids from making his father's mistakes. "I used to be ashamed of you," his son told Marcus at his graduation. "Ashamed that my dad was in prison. Ashamed of what you'd done. But now I'm proud. Not of the crime, never that. But of what you did after. How you changed. How you used your pain to help others. You showed me that mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does," Marcus cried. His relationship with his son had been the hardest part of re-entry, rebuilding trust after years of absence. Proving he'd changed. being patient with anger and resentment. But they'd done it. Slowly, painfully, they'd built something real. And now his son was following a similar path, using his experience to help others, turning pain into purpose. That was the real legacy, not the organization or the policies or the awards, but the people, the lives transformed, the families rebuilt, the cycles broken, the next generation doing better. Marcus was 59 years old now. He'd spent 18 years in prison, 15 years building this movement, 33 years total since his crime. Sometimes it felt like multiple lifetimes. The young, desperate man who committed robbery felt like a different person. The hopeless prisoner in those first years felt like someone else. The educated advocate felt like who he'd always been meant to be. But it was all him, all one journey. The crime was real. The suffering was real. The transformation was real. All of it together created who he was. He thought about Thomas often, his cellmate who died never seeing the full impact of his investment. Thomas had believed in one forgotten prisoner, had spent months encouraging Marcus to pursue education, had stayed patient through Marcus's frustration and doubt. That one relationship had changed everything, had set Marcus on a path that helped thousands. The ripple effect was endless and still spreading. "Thank you," Marcus whispered sometimes, talking to Thomas wherever he was. "Thank you for seeing something in me. Thank you for not giving up. This is all because of you." But Marcus knew it was more than Thomas. It was Dr. Warren who'd supported his re-entry, the non-profit colleagues who'd given him a chance, his son who'd forgiven him, the formerly incarcerated staff who'd built this organization together, the donors who'd believed in the mission, the policymakers who'd changed laws, the employers who'd hired program graduates. It was a movement, a community, a revolution built by thousands of people who believed rehabilitation was possible, who believed people deserved second chances, who refused to write off the incarcerated as irredeemable. Marcus had just been the spark, the proof of concept, the living evidence that transformation was real. But the fire was collective, and it was spreading. Today, Marcus continues the work. He's 62 years old, 21 years out of prison, still leading the Second Chance Education Fund, still teaching in prisons, still mentoring, still advocating. The organization has served over 15,000 incarcerated students, helped over 5,000 people successfully re-enter society, influenced policy in 43 states, trained over 2,000 formerly incarcerated peer mentors, created a national network of support that's transforming how America approaches incarceration and rehabilitation. But for Marcus, it's still about individual people. The young man who just enrolled in his first college course, the woman who's terrified about being released next month, the father trying to reconnect with children who've forgotten him. Every Tuesday, Marcus visits the prison where he served his time, teaches a class on personal transformation through education, shares his story, listens to theirs, makes connections, provides resources, offers hope. The current warden, Marcus's former student who earned her PhD while working in corrections, values his input. "You understand these men and women in ways I never can," she tells him. "You've lived it. Your presence here reminds everyone that transformation is possible, that they're not forgotten, that there's life after this." After Class 1 Tuesday, a young inmate named James approached Marcus. He was 24, serving 12 years for armed robbery. The same crime Marcus had committed, the same sentence, the same age. "I feel like I'm looking at my past," Marcus told him, "like I'm talking to myself 38 years ago." "Then tell me," James said. "Tell me the truth. Can I really change? Or is this all bullshit? Nice stories that don't mean anything for people like me." Marcus sat down. This was the moment that mattered. The question he'd asked Thomas all those years ago, the doubt he'd felt before he started his journey. "I'm not going to lie to you," Marcus said. "This is hard. Education in prison is hard. Re-entry is hard. Changing who you are is hard. Some people try and fail. Some people give up. Some people succeed inside and still struggle outside. But yes, you can really change. I'm proof. Thomas was proof. Thousands of people in our program are proof. Change is possible. But it requires work. Real work. Not just taking classes, but genuinely examining yourself. Your choices, your thinking patterns, your values. Becoming someone fundamentally different. The question isn't, can you change? The question is, will you do what it takes? Will you choose education when it's easier to watch TV? Will you study when you're exhausted? Will you keep going when you fail? Will you believe in yourself when everyone else has given up on you? I can give you resources, support, mentorship, but I can't want it for you. You have to want it. You have to choose it every single day. For years, even when it feels pointless. So yes, James, you can change. But will you? James was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. I'll try. I'll really try. That's all I ask. Try. And when you want to quit, reach out. I'll be here. I'll remind you why you started. I'll help you keep going. You're not alone in this. Marcus gave James his contact information, added him to his list of people to follow up with, made a note to connect him with the education coordinator. This was the work. Being patient. Believing in people who couldn't yet believe in themselves. Driving home that night, Marcus reflected on his life. If someone had told him at 26, sitting in that courtroom receiving his sentence, that he'd become a national leader in criminal justice reform, he would have laughed. It would have seemed absurd, impossible, like a fantasy. But it had happened. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one course at a time. From GED to bachelor's to master's to doctorate. From despair to hope. From prisoner to advocate. From forgotten to influential. He thought about the young man he'd been, desperate and stupid, making terrible choices, hurting people, ruining lives, including his own. He couldn't undo that, couldn't take back the robbery, couldn't erase the trauma he'd caused, couldn't recover the 18 years lost. His victim still carried scars. His son had grown up without a father. His mother had died disappointed. But he'd taken responsibility, owned his crime, paid his debt, and spent every day since trying to prevent others from making his mistakes, trying to create a system where desperate people had options besides crime, where mistakes didn't mean permanent disposal, where rehabilitation was real. That didn't erase his crime, but it gave it meaning. It transformed his pain into purpose. It made his suffering redemptive. Marcus pulled into his driveway, a modest house, nothing fancy, but his, a place he'd earned. A home filled with books and memories and hope. His wife, he'd married 3 years ago, a woman who'd also overcome tremendous obstacles, was cooking dinner. They'd met at a re-entry conference. Both formerly incarcerated, both educators, both dedicated to helping others. How was the prison today? She asked. Good. Met a young man who reminds me of myself. Same crime, same sentence, same age. I'm going to work with him, help him transform like Thomas helped me. And the cycle continues. And the cycle continues. They ate dinner, talked about their day, made plans for the weekend. Normal domestic life. The kind of life Marcus never thought he'd have. The kind of life prison made him think he'd forfeited forever. But here he was, 62 years old, free, purposeful, loved, making a difference, proving every single day that transformation was possible, that people deserved second chances, that forgotten prisoners could become powerful advocates for change, that rock bottom could become a foundation, that a prison cell could become a classroom, that a convicted felon could become a doctor of education and a national leader. That redemption was real. What do you think? Have you or someone you know transformed their life after hitting rock bottom? Do you believe in second chances? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it. If Marcus's story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week, stories about transformation, redemption, and the power of human resilience. Stories that remind us what's possible when people refuse to give up. Thank you for listening to Marcus's story. Thank you for believing in rehabilitation. And remember, you're not defined by your worst moment. Change is always possible. It's never too late to become who you were meant to be. See you in the next one.